Erebor, the last of the great dwarf kingdoms of Middle-earth. Our home.
Long ago, in my grandfather Thror's time, our family was driven out of the far north and came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map. They mined and they tunneled, and they made huger halls and greater workshops. And my grandfather was king under the mountain again.
The dwarves had this wonderful homeland called Erebor, which is a city inside a mountain. And all that you see is a doorway at the front of the mountain. But once you go through that doorway, you are into the most incredible world of art, riches, architecture.
And a place, you know, truly, truly beyond the imagination of anyone except dwarves with mallets and chisels and a lot of time and patience.
It started out as a mine. The dwarves entered the mountain because it was full of precious minerals and metal.
That was reason enough to start chipping their way into the mountain, and they would then carve architecture into that. So there's a heap of architecture above you and a heap of architecture below you.
Erebor is a great city. That's kind of an equivalent to Minas Tirith in its splendor and size and richness, but it's all inside a mountain.
Which to me was very exciting. It needed to feel cavernous and infinite, because when they go in there, it's not just a few tunnels that where a dragon's hiding. It's huge and vast and deep. So that was really beautiful.
We started the design process, paying attention to what we'd actually designed before for Moria, and we really get the impression of these huge spaces, really huge halls.
Behold, the great realm and dwarf city of Dwarven.
And the key element to the Dwarven architecture and Dwarven aesthetic in general is the lack of curves. Curves are what defines the Elven architecture.
There's a sort of whimsical side to Elven architecture. Much more floral, it's much more organic.
And the Dwarven architecture is the polar opposite of that. And it's solid and stocky. Everything is angles and straight lines.
We've never seen a dwarf kingdom in its heyday. You know, we've seen ruined ones before, but not one in its prime.
As part of this point of difference of Erebor from Moria, we decided to go with a palette change inside this mountain.
Moria was basically a kind of a grey stone, very kind of bleak and dark and ruinous because it had been inhabited by Balrogs and orcs.
Whereas this dwarven city was pretty much intact, you know, so there was an opportunity to show a dwarven city in the light. And while we were working out what that was, I came across some great reference of green marble flecked with gold that's mined in a mountain in China. And it was just great, hey, here's the gift, you know. The gift is the Lonely Mountain is a solid green marble mountain with veins of quartz carrying all sorts of minerals. And as they've tapped their way through this beautiful marble, they've also smoothed off the edges and made rooms and corridors and stairways. One of the big influences there was chapels in the salt mines in Russia. You know, the function of a salt mine is to gain you access to the veins of salt to get it out. But to do that, you have to leave a certain amount to hold the roof above up. And so the guys had managed to chisel out these beautiful salt chapels in the middle of a mountain. And so it's all about the mathematics of how to mine inside a mountain, how to keep the mountain standing up.
Imagine that you're in the Grand Canyon that's been turned upside down and everything is carved. Nothing has been constructed out of masonry. Everything has been carved from the rock. There's a temple in India called Kailash Nath, an extraordinary stone temple carved out of a cliff. There's a lot of that in a lot of the drawings that I did, trying to imagine what would this place be like if it had been built by dwarves and carved into a mountainside. One of the things that defined Erebor as compared to Moria is their infatuation with monumental sculpture. It's absolutely symbolic of the way they see themselves.
Although the dwarves are obviously by definition smaller than the other human inhabitants of Middle-earth, when they represent themselves in statues, we get this sense of this kind of mighty, powerful and venerable people.
And a lot of people don't know the backstory that Tolkien wrote to the dwarves, but they were the first creatures actually made. And they were made by mistake by one of the gods.
It's Aule who is particularly associated with craftsmanship. And it turns out that he has done this without the permission of Eru, the one god. Eru's plan was for the elves to be the firstborn, the first kindred, and actually Aule has created the dwarves first.
And so they are put to sleep until their time comes when the world is ready for them to come forth.
And when they awoke, they were suddenly aware of the fact that Middle-earth wasn't there for them, it was there for the elves.
The fact that the dwarves are considered a secondary race has really shaped them. Dwarves have big, proud egos. You look at Erebor and they build big. I think when you see monuments like that, you realize that dwarves believe they're going to be around for a long time. They believe they have a legacy in this world. You know, you don't build monuments like that if you don't believe that your line is going to live and live and live.
If you look at the Dwarven statues, they were all big and blocky and angular. There was nothing soft and nothing gentle about them. It's almost like Russian brutalist architecture. A lot of that big Russian sculpture was very stylized, no softness. It's about strength. They're brutal and strong.
Peter really liked something that was done by one of the Weta artists, which was of a crouching dwarf with an axe, suggesting the military power and the preciousness of what they were guarding.
It's a stronghold, and the only way into Erebor is through this enormous singular gate.
I think we started out quite modestly under the Lonely Mountain, once again thinking of Tolkien, thinking of that little door at the bottom of the mountain. And Peter simply kept coming back and saying, well, no, something bigger, something grander, something more extraordinary. We tried very hard to raise Erebor up on ramparts and stairways and to actually have the Dwarven kingdom dominating one of the grandest human cities in the East, and to be in a city like Dale, which is a prosperous, thriving metropolis, but always to have somewhere above you up against the sky and silhouette of this enormous mountain, this great Dwarven kingdom looking over you, I think would have been extraordinary. The biggest monument I've ever seen of that kind, and it's not one that's been carved, it's been constructed, is the monument of the Battle of Nations in Leipzig in former East Germany. It's absolutely extraordinary, and the figures that are there, there's a St. Michael, there's the face of Loki is on the steps leading up each side of it. There's these huge Teutonic knights which ring the structure at the very top and guard the crypt in the center. That was a great inspiration for Erebor.
The main gate of Erebor feels impenetrable, massive ramparts, but it's also the scale, because like you come up to this huge gate, and obviously if that's the front door, then how big is inside this mountain?
And once you enter in through the front gate, you enter into a long kind of entrance hall, and from there you can kind of see down into various depths in various directions.
Certainly imagining some big spaces. I wouldn't be surprised if we would only end up just building a set inside K-stage for one of the main halls that's as big as the stage.
Yeah.
Just about lining the walls, you know? You know, I mean, almost. I mean, you kind of want something of that scale and size,
The entrance hall filled Kong stage, which was wonderful because then we had the thickness of the wall. So we could really sense something of the scale and strength of the place.
The way that it was built, everything was massive. The ramparts would go really high, or the big dwarf sculptures would be really genuinely huge. So I found that I got a really good sense of the character of the dwarves' ability to build such huge creations, and they're just such short of stature.
You feel very secure being inside the walls. It's like you're in a really fortified fortress that no one can get into, and that's exactly what it was in the movie.
So essentially what we're looking at is the usual art department materials, polystyrene and plaster and paint, but this time made to represent this deep-hued, green, highly polished and veined marble. And we're very fortunate to have Catherine Lim as the set finisher. She was a real expert on actually kind of creating those very realistic surfaces.
Yep. And just over there is concrete. So we're trying to work out what the best substrate is, what the cheapest one.
Cool.
So I went to a school where I just learned how to paint marble for six months in Brussels, and that was quite helpful when we actually came to having to paint miles and miles of marble here. It's basically a dark green marble with a little bit of gold going through it and red veins, so it looks as if it's got some life to it, and that's a beautiful and rich marble.
It might have been built out of things that you could knock a hole in, but it certainly looked like it was green marble. It was, you know, you'd have to go up and actually make sure it wasn't green marble a lot of the time. Loved the design of it.
God, you walk onto these sets and they're just unbelievable. Like walking through the sets of Erebor after the dragon has come, and there are massive scratches through the walls.
I've got to say this is probably one of my favourites so far. It's predominantly lots of destruction and debris, as you can probably see behind me. Interior Erebor was like Dale in that you could tell it was once a grand, beautiful place, and it was completely destroyed.
And you get a sense of what it must have been like when it was in its heyday. We looked at pictures of Detroit, a city that's, you know, fallen on hard times, and so there are interiors of theatres and buildings that were once wonderful, and here they were in disrepair, and so that was the kind of feeling that we were trying to evoke with Erebor.
One of the elements in the story was that directly adjacent to the great entrance hall of Erebor was the armoury. And so we had two stages very close to each other with a sort of corridor in between. So we came up with the concept of why don't we make a corridor that goes from the grand armoury through and then into the next stage, which is then the great hall.
We had the main door open to K stage, so you could basically walk between sound stages and never leave the set.
It was quite appropriate that the weapons area, the armory, would be kind of adjacent to the entrance hall so that people could grab their weapons and kind of run in and leap to the defences.
The Erebor armory set was a great set. We brought in all these racks of spears and weapons and dressed the hell out of it. You know, we filled that room up with all sorts of Dwarven weapons and also these amazing Dwarven suits of armour on stands.
In the Dwarven armoury, we find armour that's from our forefathers.
From the very beginning of the design process, we knew that at some point we're going to have to deliver the regal dwarfs. Tolkien gave us the lead once again. He wrote such beautiful words around the shining armour and the dying light.
Hood and cloak were gone. They were in shining armour, and red light leapt from their eyes. In the gloom, the great dwarf gleamed like gold in a dying fire.
The jumping off point of Tolkien's description in the book was great fodder for designing some cool armour, so we were able to go to town with it. My thought process with the regal armour was the idea that the lineage of kings and the history of the dwarves sort of accumulated into this one mountain of wealth, and the company would, you know, just cherry pick stuff that they saw in the hoarders, being, well, I'm gonna wear that.
Nick, very early up, conceptualised some very broad archetypes, and Pete loved them.
He gravitated more towards the idea of sort of large expanses of metal, so, you know, large plate armour, A lot of Eastern European, Indian armour, which they incorporated a lot of small segments of plate interwoven with chain and all sorts of, a myriad of different patterns. The samurai armour was definitely a heavy influence as well, like the little armoured tanks, essentially. And I found that quite compelling, so that was something I explored a lot with the dwarves.
So when you're faced with designing 13 dwarves, Nick is having to come up with unique and original ideas. Slowly, he started to knock them off. He started to define and find these designs, and Peter loved them.
I have to say, those are some of probably the most gorgeous costumes ever created for a motion picture.
Oh, can you pan on to Zane and repeat that, Zane?
I'm just repeating what Richard said.
Oh, no, you say as your quote, then it will get on.
No, I'm not good on camera.
I mean, these are the best costume ideas that we've seen so far.
Great.
The first time I saw the regal armour, I was just gobsmacked. I saw a picture of it and it looked incredible, and then we had the fittings.
Perfect, thank you.
Yes, the spleen's quite tough.
That's better, yeah. Just there.
Obviously, the most special suit of Erebor regal armour is Thorin's.
He takes the cake, really, because we designed and built and painted and finished a suit of armour for him with a ram motif and a full helmet.
It was like a motorcycle helmet made of gold with the kind of crafted ram's horns that came out of the side. I'm sad that we never saw that because the design was extraordinary.
And it was spectacular and it was beautiful, but it just wasn't Thorin. And in that last few days, Nick found a gem in the mountain.
We came to the raven motif, which sort of ties to Thorin and his family and the mountain.
It always felt right because it's part of the legend of when the king comes back to the mountain, the ravens will return to Erebor.
The raven very much became a motif for the royal line of Thror, Thrain and Thorin.
So that seemed appropriate and it worked really well from an aesthetic point of view, having the inlaid black sort of obsidian pieces, which were incorporated into the crown that Paul designed and then into the armour that I designed to go with it.
You sit here in these vast halls with a crown upon your head, and yet you are lesser now than you have ever been.
I spent the day doing this area in Erebor, and Peter looked at it and said, well, I've got to say I'm underwhelmed.
Yeah.
It's just a shame that with all these big, grand ideas we've had, that we've ended up with something that's just slammed against a wall.
Yes. Sometimes you can work quite hard on an idea that you think is brilliant, and Peter will look at it and, yeah, okay, what else have you got? So that's quite good as well, because you don't really ever forget that it's part of a very small portion of a very big process.
So you hold one of these up.
And you look intelligent? No, we're going to do that.
No. You hold this up.
Okay.
And you're showing it to Alan.
Right.
And you're going, and Alan's just shaking his head.
Yeah.
And then, Alan, what you do... No, a little closer.
Then I throw up on it?
No, just a little closer to him. And then, so you show him this one, you shake your head like, that sucks, John. And then you pick this one up, which is one of yours.
No, there's one too.
Okay, well then you pick one up, one that's yours, and then he shakes his head. Okay, here we go, ready? So we'll take it from the top, and...
What do you think? No? Oh. It's awful. Who did that?
So then we kind of came up with something that involved adding a kind of a green screen shoot-off with a lot more depth.
The throne room in Erebor was literally a landing strip of green, a throne and a pillar. There was nothing else there.
And then you get shown the art, the concept art for what that throne room will actually look like in the movie. And it's incredible. This island suspended in a void, surrounded by giant dwarven statues.
So that as you walk down that central walkway, you're flanked by a kind of a standing guard, essentially, of these figures.
The way the process kicks off is we will take a sequence and identify the shots that kind of represent the definitive views of the environment, and Alan Lee and John Howe are doing concept art for those master shots. And so that becomes our reference point for kicking off the 3D build.
We've made the sense of the depth of the space around them. We've extended the throne column up.
And in that throne is set the Arkenstone, which to the dwarves is the most precious object in their world, essentially, which was uncovered during the course of their excavations deep in the heart of the mountain.
The whole thing about Erebor is it probably goes down as far as the mountain goes up. And they've worked their way right down to the very heart of the mountain. They've found the Arkenstone.
This is the lowest part of the mine shaft, which is kind of like off limits, really. The cavern as such is above, and that's where a lot of the work is going along. A lot of the machinery's up there, a lot of the treasure's up there. This is sort of the depths of the cavern, and these guys are working the lower parts. And our man down here, he suddenly comes across this most incredibly powerful, beautiful stone.
The Arkenstone, it's this mystic rock that the dwarves uncovered. It doesn't essentially have power. It's not like, something that's going to be able to melt tanks and, blow things up. But it's become so symbolic that it's the only thing that will unite the 7 dwarf families who are scattered around Middle-earth.
May the heart of the mountain unite all dwarves in defense of this home.
It shone like silver in the firelight, like water in the sun, like snow under the stars, like rain upon the moon.
The description that Professor Tolkien gave was of a light that was so active and so primeval that it was almost like the beginning of creation.
The way that we first conceived it was that captured within it some kind of hologram of what the universe had looked like at the moment of its creation.
Maybe it's a remnant of the Tolkienian Big Bang. There's something that sort of reflects the nature of the universe in this small rock, which is why it's so precious to the dwarves.
We would look at photographs from the Hubble Space Telescope. That would give us the kind of reference that we were using for that sense of deep space that we see when we peer into the stone.
And then Peter wanted that to sort of expand, sort of trail out into the air from the Arkenstone itself.
It's like swirling constellations inside, slowly.
Yeah.
Their forces light out beyond the surface of it, and it drifts, and maybe it creates little kind of rainbow effects in the atmosphere, but then it sort of dissipates. It was as if I was holding the stone still here for a few seconds. All these light refractions would drift out of it.
Yeah.
We did have a Arkenstone prop, which is kind of like a glass rock that was sort of a creamy white colour.
We had some shapes made up, and Peter chose one of them and thought that was nice. And the same, our producer is much more kind of down to earth than most of us. Said it looks like a breast implant.
I wasn't going to mention that set us back 3 months.
And then after that, Peter said, well, now that you've said it, that's all we're going to see,
We couldn't actually think of it in any other way from that point, having put this into our mind,
Thanks very much.
Anyway, we came up with the shape that kind of looked right and felt right.
The thing with Erebor was it is this, it's this vast kind of infinite place, but the Deep Tombs is a point where it's no longer vast and infinite. We know from the book that it's the bottom of Erebor. So you've reached an end point, in Erebor, and it had to kind of feel like that.
Yeah. Would there be lake men here? And
let me get my pictures. Hang on. Stay right where you are. Yeah, I'll just hand these around. So the idea, the rough idea, is that this thing is on a shield held by statues, and you guys are the only ones on the shield. You and Gandalf and Bayon and Radagast are here. But there's going to be, this doesn't really show it. There's going to be like hundreds of Danes, dwarves, all around. You can hand it around, but or we just rest it against the corpse.
We came up with this idea that this sort of a stone plinth is held by two figures on the edge of this bottomless chasm of some kind.
You know, it's a conscious decision on behalf of the architects and the people that were making this space. And I'm talking the dwarves, to stop there and to not carry on around it and leave it as a pinnacle. You know, it literally was, you know, an end point for them.
Tolkien was very influenced by the ideas of Norse mythology, that after death there will be a period of waiting, in some cases waiting for return. And actually Thorin says much the same thing when he's mortally wounded.
I go now to the halls of waiting to sit beside my fathers until the world is renewed.
There is a short piece Tolkien wrote which predicts how Middle-earth will end and how after that the world will be remade, the world will be renewed.
As for the fate of the dwarves, some of them then return to Middle-earth. And because of their skill and their reputation as craftsmen, they will be a critical factor in the rebuilding of a new world, in the recreation of a new and we hope a better Middle-earth.
I have a very soft spot for dwarves and dwarven design within this world. You know, at the heart of the dwarves, they make things. And I relate that with our own workforce, our own team, that love of making things with your hands and creating something special.
For us on Hobbit, we were able to build 107 sets, 107 different environments. There is a vast scale that's so beyond everyday imagination. But also there's a real intimacy when you're able to build a set and go there and say, wow, I would love to live here.
The sheer scope of what's on the screen in the Hobbit trilogy is so vast that it sent us off looking for reference and inspiration to practically every corner of the world and through a few thousand years of history. I can't imagine any other job that lets you do that.
10 years worth of work's gone into producing these 6 films and finding a visual narrative for all of those worlds in Middle-earth. I don't think anyone will ever have the opportunity to really analyse a world as much as we have with Middle-earth.
The responsibility that all the visual artists involved with the films is of creating something that is going to last for a very long time, which is actually going to affect the way that people read the books, whether we like it or not. We've created this version of Middle-earth, which is Middle-earth for a huge number of people.
I've begun to reflect on the fact that never before in our own country's history has there been the coming together of such a significant group of craftspeople and artisans to create a singular art movement of this scale.
I do have so much respect for the work that these guys, the stuff that they make, that I can't bear to throw any of it away. The wonderful costumes and the sets and the props and the weapons that get built. It's on film now, the film will survive way beyond us, but these objects, they are special.
Still sharp.
So I have warehouses full of them.
I was just walking through there the other day, actually. It's very much like walking through the warehouse of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think Peter ultimately would like to showcase a lot of these things and possibly why he's kept them.
That would be a hope for the future. I mean, there's no plans at the moment, but certainly, you know, it's be nice to give people a chance to have a look at it one day.
It's one of the great joys of these films is that imagining and building of this varied and unique architecture of Middle-earth. All these props and the scenery and the sets are so meticulously, believably real that you forget you're in the studios in Wellington. Middle-earth was there. It existed.